I am so excited for this episode of Rebel Radio. My guest today has been on the show twice before. So, this is the magic number three, James Gardiner, my friend, my colleague, someone that is near and dear to my heart. Welcome back to the show.
Cindy Van, how the hell are you?
Oh, I'm so excited for this conversation today. So, you and I do a weekly show where we talk about the rhythm and the flow and throw in a little bit of coaching and strategy. So, I've shared a lot of numerology with you over the past couple of years. And I'm
Mhm.
curious, what has been some of your biggest takeaways from understanding numerology a little bit more?
Yeah. Well, first off, every time I think I understand it, you throw in another layer that causes me to kind of backpedal and and have to reassess.
Hmm.
Well, it's been interesting. When we first met, definitely science-based mindset. So I like strategy. I like numbers. I like sequencing. Like it just one plus one, blah blah, blah. And so I think you coined the phrase, it's cheat sheet for life. And I do feel that way. I feel that it's really been an eye opener in terms of just a strategical way to set up the energy, the natural rhythm energy that we each have, that the days have, that the months and the years have, and just finding that flow. That's the big thing. That bridge to flow has been amazing.
Beautiful. I love it. So, I have had the pleasure of reading your book. This book you have been working on for what, 2 years now?
Just yeah, basically 2 years, just
Almost
about.
2 years. I know you had started writing it when I first met you, when you were the first time you came on Rebel Radio, and I've had the honor and privilege of reading it now, and I cannot wait for you to share it with the world. And today, tell us about the book, James. Tell us about this book.
Well, Cindy, yes, it's been a 2 year labor of love, and honestly, it's been a life. It's been a lifetime, and it is, as you know, it is my story. It's one of James, one of Jim, and one of little Jimmy, all coming to understanding what life is, how to navigate life, how to have fun, how to play, how to um, live each day in our own truth, and uh, let go of the expectation playbook that we're handed when we walk through that doorway to adulthood.
Yeah.
So it's uh, it's a journey. It's a
Hmm.
journey to the hero within. That's really what it is.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it is like no other book I've ever read. This is not a personal development book. It's a memoir, and yet it's not. There's so many layers to this. And the way I see it is just really a creative project of you putting your life's work out into the world. And I met you as James. I have always called you James. You were in the transition between Jim and James, and I refused to call you Jim. It wasn't happening.
Yeah.
But little
Mm.
Jimmy had asthma, and Jimmy spent lots of time in the hospital. Tell us about a little bit about Jimmy and that character and who you were back then.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that we all have as adults as a common denominator is we were all children once,
Mhm.
and we all had that ability to create our own masterpiece every day, the Beethoven in us. And for Jimmy, little Jimmy, being a weak and frail asthmatic child who was in the hospital a lot,
Mhm.
he turned to the power of dreams and the power of make believe to ease his aloneness, to provide comfort, and to create a place for him to want to go to get away from where he was.
Yeah.
And the little Jimmy was into movies and Star Trek and space and all of those things, and desperately wanted to do two things. He wanted to be an actor and wanted to be an athlete.
Yeah.
That was a big thing for him. Um, And I think for little Jimmy, even at a young age, he had this ability to feel what others were feeling on screen, or live the moment that he was seeing portrayed on the Zenith television, back in the day. Yeah, yeah.
And little Jimmy had a lot of crushes on candy strippers.
Little Jimmy, little Jimmy, those dreaded candy stripers, they were dreaded. They were this mythical, as you know, this mythical society in the hospitals, right? And so Jimmy first got his seed of attention back then, and that obviously, as we'll talk about, festered into this wanting and this egoic need to be on stage under the lights. But it was really, back in the hospital wing, reenacting a child's book to an audience of candy stripers, and the actor was born.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. So, desire to be an athlete. That to me was one of the most powerful stories in the book, at the beginning of the book, anyways, was your journey into being an athlete and discovering what sport you wanted to get into. And you finally chose the sport of rowing. And I learned more about rowing than I ever knew I could know by reading the book. But I remember messaging you when I read that first story and saying, oh my God, this book has just made me bawl my eyes out, because that story was so inspiring to see little Jimmy with asthma and always in the hospital to coming through to this big achievement. So tell us a little bit about the rowing part of your youth.
Yeah, well, like many things with little Jimmy and then Jimmy, it stemmed from a movie. Happened to be a nondescript movie. My dad came home with a VHS tucked under his arm and said, "Here, Jimmy, I think you might like this." And 4 hours later, I'd watched it back to back. And it was a movie about rowing, and it was called Oxford Blues with Rob Lowe. Not a great movie. However,
Sorry, Rob Lowe.
sorry, Rob Lowe. I mean, it's typical 80s coming of age stuff, late 80s, but it was it just captivated me. This code, this brotherhood, this selfless bond to a goal. And I said, I want to row. And my doctor told me I was literally nuts, that it's too demanding of a sport for an asthmatic boy wonder, as I call myself in the book. And I said, well, screw that. And I went, and I went to an auditorium. I'll never forget, Monday, 7:30 p.m., auditorium, room 101, slideshow, bunch of us all there, mesmerized by this slideshow and this introduction into the sport. And the very next afternoon, I had to meet and run 3 miles. Never ran 3 miles, never really ran a mile, never could do anything. Thankfully, I had my little asthma puffer, and I never gave up. Yeah. And the rest is kind of history. Rowing is something that's defined me, as you know. And it's had its full circle moments in my life. It's come back in, and it's just a huge thing for me. Yeah.
Love that. Yeah, and it's thread throughout the whole book, which I love, and that it really supported you when you were going through some tough times. And yeah, I love that.
And true story too, just a sidebar. I mean, that series in the book, 9 Hearts, which is that, which for me is probably, I honestly, Cindy, it's probably the most defining period of my life.
Yeah.
And at one point when I was in New York, later on in my career, Disney had expressed interest in a screenplay that I wrote about that season. And, it's just, I know I'm biased. It's just a great story.
It is. It is. I can vouch for that. Love it. So then New York happens.
Oh,
Let's
yeah.
talk about New York, because there's some fun stuff that happens in New York, and there's some scary shit that happens in New York.
Well, what do you want to know, Cindy Van? I mean, I Jimmy went through rowing in university, gained a lot of confidence, gained a lot of courage, had the ability to say, "Hey, why not me? I can do anything."
Mhm.
And you know, entered a modeling contest, and before he knew it, he was signed with a talent agent and moving to New York, and then wanted to be an actor. That little Jimmy, that dream, that truthful dream, never wavered.
Yeah.
And those damn candy stripers, uh, and so Jim, at this point in the story, Jim, now young man, uh, pursued a career in the entertainment industry,
Mhm.
was on TV, was on stage, found himself in some questionable situations, some questionable business choices, perhaps.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you supported yourself like a lot of actors do behind the bar, serving drinks and slinging drinks late at night. And you got yourself mixed up with some shady characters. Tell us about the moment when you were on the boat and you thought you were going to die.
Yeah. I, I was bartending at a very upscale, Upper East Side hotel bar called the Stanhope Hotel, very old school Hollywood. Um, there was a millionairess and her electrician, handyman, contractor that started to come in all the time, and we became actually really good friends. And before I know it, I was working for them and in their world. So I was, slinging drinks, but then all of a sudden, a few months later, I was out at the Hamptons and hobnobbing and living that lifestyle a little bit, when all of a sudden her bitter divorced husband, or in divorce, they were in the process of divorce, wound up murdered. And this became, I don't even know what his estate was. I think valued at $90 million or something. He was an investment broker. And here's little Jimmy, because his best friend, Daniel, at the time, suspect number one. So it was all over the news. I couldn't go anywhere. Paparazzi following me, obviously following Danny. And so what you're referring to is, Danny's Danny, hey, I mean, Jimmy, we're going for a ride. I'm like, okay, where are you taking me? Right. So he takes me out to Long Island to see his uncle, and they asked me to get on a boat, and they start kind of pushing me in the boat and kind of pushing me up into the cabin of the boat. And as I literally looked down to see if I was standing on plastic tarp, because I thought I was going to get whacked. No word of lie, God's honest truth. Uh, and in retrospect, I mean, they were pressuring me. They were seeing if I knew anything, if I was talking to the police, etc. Right? Because I was in that inner circle, so I was at that time I was privy to some information. So, needless to say, I got home and had to change my drawers, but thankfully, nothing happened.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll never forget that. And of course, the case went on, and it became one of the uh, most well-known murder cases in New York City history. Law and Order did their own standoff episode on it. I think it had 2 made-for-TV movies and even a book.
Wow.
uh, and yeah, Jim was center stage on that one.
I remember as I was reading through your book, I was like, oh, now I need to Google this. And I would go and Google some of these stories.
Oh.
And I remember texting you, like, is this you? Is this you? Such a fascinating story. Now, back to the athlete thing, you have suffered a sports injury, but it ain't from rowing.
That's correct, Cindy Van. How did you know that?
So tell us about your torn ACL.
Yeah, I blew out my ACL. Everyone
Uh-huh.
always asks me how I blew out my ACL. No one ever really knows how I blew out my ACL. I tell people that I did it playing basketball.
Mm-hmm. You
Well,
weren't playing basketball, though.
no, I wasn't. So I yeah, I was a Chippendale dancer for a while. I was one of the lead dancers in New York City in the late '90s, and yeah, Jim had a little epic fail in front of 250 screaming women in Pennsylvania, and blew his knee out. Yeah. Um, I wish it was more glamorous than that. However, I did go out in a blaze of glory. I actually finished the number, and I probably, honestly, Cindy, I think I got the loudest applause I've ever received on stage, actually, in my life, making it through that disaster, because it was like Keystone Cops. I couldn't walk. I kept falling down, kept tripping over the chair, and it was just a nightmare. Yeah.
So that was one of my favorite stories. I love that story. So let's talk about the applause, because there is a thread throughout Jim's part of his life where you were craving the applause and the attention, and that led into you moving to LA and just the dream of being in movies and things like that. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, the I said earlier the doorway to adulthood, and when Jim uh, went into the New York arena and went in through that door of adulthood, the fissure the crack started to happen between little Jimmy and Jim.
Mm-hmm.
And little Jimmy um, wanted the spotlight and the applause in a truthful, honest, sincere way of entertaining the Candy Stripers, bringing smiles, bringing emotion. And for Jim, that applause started to be an external form of validation.
Yeah.
That kind of egoic spotlight and the fame, and I've been very privileged to have a lot of interactions with celebrities, and some of those things are in the book, and even dated a few women that are pretty well known, and it was all kind of this false sense of worth. You mean
Yeah.
something, and that applause kept going, and yeah, when I went to LA, finally I spent 12 years in New York, and then I went to LA for 2 years, and there was one defining moment where I thought this was it. I thought all destiny had arrived. Everything has led to this. All these serendipitous moments added
Mm-hmm.
up, and I was there, and then I wasn't.
Right.
And the dream died,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, the dream died, and with that death, if you will, the death of the dream, came the absence of the child within, came the absence of little Jimmy. Yeah.
Yeah. Heartbreaking. And then you moved to Canada.
Mm.
After a stint in LA, you moved to Canada and give up your dream. And then you end up working with your wife's family. And then Broomhilda comes along.
Broomhilda. Yeah.
You knew I was going to bring up Broomhilda.
Yeah. I I moved, everyone's like, Broomhilda. We'll get there. I
You just
moved,
have to read the book. You're going to have to get the book and read it.
I with the death of a dream comes the absence of joy, period. And, when you're not living life through the eyes of a wonder of an inner child, everything is dull. Everything is gray. I was unhappy, even though I had an amazing life on the outside. And by that time, I was running a very big hospitality resort golf community. I was the director of operations. I had 250 employees underneath me, corner office, big salary. Woohoo!
Quite a
And
change from Chippendales and bartending and acting.
I know, right? I know. And then, you know, shit went sideways a little bit in the resort in this one particular position. And then this woman, this Broomhilda, showed up, and turned my life upside down. And as I talk about in the book, this was a precursor to the whole Me Too movement. And um, I was for 8 months, 9 months, I was mentally abused and by this witch,
Mhm.
right? This negative, horrible human being, unfortunately, or just obviously now I can say objectively, obviously the poor thing had her own stuff going on.
Yeah.
However, um, it turned my life upside down, and anxiety, and I had to go on medication. And I ended up walking away. Well, actually, that's not true. I ended up filing an official uh, complaint with Human Resources. I just couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah.
And they let me go the very next day. They basically shit canned my ass the very next day, uh,
Mhm.
to which I drug them through the coals of wrongful dismissal with the labor board, and sure as shit, I won. But it it really brought to me this idea of, we're all human beings, and no one no one needs to be at the harmful slings and arrows of someone else for no apparent reason. And I don't even, as you know, like, I don't claim to even, there was nothing physical about that, right? It wasn't
Mhm.
any type of sexual, or it was just mental. But that
Mhm.
alone just really opened my eyes to the bigger picture, which we were talking about earlier, right? So it was a I will say that the Broomhilda scenario was really the catalyst for this death spiral that began,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
Um, and then after that, obviously, shit went south for me, and then I had to go find myself. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So shit really did go south, and I'll let your readers figure that out on their
Mhm,
own.
mhm.
Um, but one of the most inspiring pieces of your story is as we come to the end of the book and you become James,
Mhm.
the James Gardiner that I know and love. Tell us a little bit about that death and rebirth process for you. Mhm.
Yeah, I talk about, in the work that I do in the world, I talk about my jungle event, and it is going into the jungle of my own mind in the book.
Mhm.
And I knew I knew that a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about now wasn't serving me.
Yeah.
Even my rowing accolades later in life, and the corner office and all that. Again, that was the same as applause.
Hmm.
Um, the attention I was getting from women. That's the same as being back on in a Chippendale stage, right? It was all external validation. So I knew I needed to go into the jungle. I needed to strip all that shit away and find myself. And ultimately, I didn't know at the time. I just knew that I had to get to what I call the tree of life to be reborn. And for me, on that journey, then I knew, for me, my truth, because I talk about truth, is the inner child,
Yeah.
and and reconnecting to the little Jimmy that I left in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
and being reborn as James, it's a hybrid of James's Jim, but it's James's little Jimmy. As you know me, little
Mhm.
Jimmy sitting right here
Yeah.
always.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hero within. And we all will be better human beings, better fathers, better lovers, partners, business associates, if we all honor and connect or reconnect, in my case, to that child, because that's purity, that's truth.
Yeah.
And we're not living on anyone else's terms. We're living on our own terms, and that's a powerful thing. It can be scary.
Hmm.
Not going to be scary, and it's powerful.
Mm. Total goosebumps. Total goosebumps. Everybody needs to read this book. It is it's funny. It makes you laugh out loud. It's emotional. It makes you cry, and it's inspirational. It makes you feel like there's hope for everybody. And I just recommend this book. Like, I can't even, words can't even. Just go get the book. Thank you, James, for sharing it with me. And one of the things that you kind of alluded to when we were talking about Brumhilda is this idea that we're all humans and we're all experiencing this collective experience together. And of course, Rebel Radio, we talk about unity consciousness. I am very curious to know how you define unity consciousness,
Mm.
especially after the journey that you've been on.
Yeah, well, we all have a story. Uh, we all live different lives, and yet we're all ultimately connected. And part of that connection, that consciousness, um, is that common denominator. How I started this conversation. We were all children once, and this idea of unity consciousness is. I truly believe that being present. We always talk about in our world being present. Who, Cindy, who does it better than kids?
Right.
Right?
Right. They don't judge themselves. They're so innocent in their curiosity and their exploration of this world, and
Mm.
they're not afraid to try new things and explore because the judgment's not there.
So if we want a collective consciousness, be present with your inner child. That
Mm,
that hand, that little tiny hand is it's outstretched, it's waiting for you.
yeah. Oh, so powerful. So, what final thoughts would you like to leave us about your book, about the experience of writing it, about moving it out into the world? What would you like to share with us?
Yeah, thanks, Cindy. We are all artists too. I feel that this creative spark is something that's a human condition across the board. We have different ways of expression, and I
Mhm.
think expression is such a powerful conduit for growth.
Mhm.
This book process for me has been absolutely amazing. It's been cathartic. It's been heartwarming. It's allowed me to reconnect to bits and pieces that I had forgotten.
Mhm.
You know, I just my wish for the world and this book is just to pause and look at each other's own lives. We all have these beautiful full circle moments that are gifts if we just open our eyes and sit with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, my story is perhaps unique to many people,
Mhm.
and as you were saying, and thank you for what you said, Cindy. It's a book that unlike any book you've read,
Yeah.
and that's because I'm different than you and someone else. We all have our stories, and so this book is it's me, it's film, it's fantasy, it's reality, it's the movie Big Fish with Forrest Gump. I mean, some of the situations that my younger self finds himself in is just ludicrous, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And at the end of the day, though, it's as simple as a little child
Yeah.
begging the adult not to give up on a dream.
Mm. Yeah, don't give up on your dreams.
Yeah. So
So good. So good. James, thank you so much for being on the show today. I appreciate you. I appreciate being able to read your book before anyone else. I feel spoiled, rotten, as per usual. But as always, we end Rebel Radio with one last question. What do you dream of for the world?
play.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
wind through the hair as you're riding your bike down the street. And that can be found walking on the beach, that can be found in a conversation, that can be found in a movie, in a time of complete silence.
Yeah.
That's the inner child.
Mm.
Yeah.
So good. Thank you, James.
Thanks, Cindy Van. Appreciate it.